Hey everyone.
Hello.
You could have been anywhere, but you're here with us. So I want to be at the beach. It is so hot today. But we have Tarana Burke. Tarana, of course, is the founder of the METOO hashtag and movement. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that work. I want to start, we're going to do this as a conversation. We only have about a half hour, and I want to open it up to questions early on. We're going till 3:30, and I guess I don't know if there are mics in the room, but we want to early on get into questions with folks if they have any. But I want to start with my own, and I've asked you this before, but I think it's important in this era where we see a lot of erasure of Black women's labor, about what had to happen for us to know that Me Too was a phrase that you came up with 20 years ago to kind of organize around sexual violence.
Well, it was Black women, as always, right? When Alyssa Milano tweeted the phrase, said, if you've been sexually assaulted or harassed, to say Me Too, she did so at the behest of a friend who actually had seen my work. Which this is all we discovered later. She didn't do it on purpose. Don't think that she was trying to intentionally steal something. But the beautiful thing about both community and about just doing your work is that people will recognize you when the time comes. And so I didn't have to launch a big campaign. People started saying, wait a minute, this exists. And I think it also was a perfect storm because we've seen so much erasure, and we've seen it happen with Black women online in very specific ways. I think there was also a sense of like, we're not gonna let this happen again. And so sisters got to typing real fast. Sisters were like, oh no, you didn't. It was wonderful. And within 24 hours, she'd issue an apology and said, this work already exists. I think it's a beautiful example of community and allyship, actually, because, I'll give credit where credit is due for sure. She didn't have to do any of that. She could have just been like, so what, this Black woman exists, like folks normally do. But one, we were holding her accountable. Our community was holding her accountable, and two, she did the right thing, so, yeah.
Well, speaking of accountability, let's get right into it. There are two things that come to mind in this moment, and both of them are actually connected to Color of Change. But let's start off with this question about Black women's health, actually, since this is the American Heart Association sponsoring this event. And it's not as if these two things aren't connected. This question of surviving sexual trauma, abuse, and violence, and the kind of statistics we see on Black women's physical, emotional, and mental health.
Yeah.
And I know that early on, and you can start maybe by talking about the work that you started doing 20 years ago. At what point in your work did you understand that all of these things were connected?
I think it took some time for me to see the pieces. I spent the early part of my life as an organizer and a community worker, right, for various things, but mostly with young people. And I would see not just the young people I worked with who were experiencing trauma, but I saw the generational trauma, right? I saw when you try to intercept things that were happening in the home, or you try to insert yourself and involve, and I got to meet parents and grandparents and uncles and aunties, and then you saw, that this is a problem that's linked to something that's deeper than just this individual child. And so when it came to sexual violence, for me, it was these girls were showing up to school and they had behavior problems, or they had learning disabilities, or they had all these different things that they tag our children with, but nobody interrogates why. And so our method and the work I was doing was to go to the school and ask for those children. And it didn't have any, at the time, it had nothing to do with sexual violence. It was just, these are the kids people want to throw away all the time. So when we brought our program to schools, our leadership program, I would meet with the council and say, I need all the girls who have been suspended in the last 6 months. I need all the girls on the list that are going to be expelled. I need all the girls who you've labeled as problems. And they would take them. They would gladly, get that list together. But those girls disproportionately, in my opinion, had asthma. They disproportionately had other kind of like physical ailments. And you can see it's not just what I saw over time is it wasn't just the trauma that they experienced from sexual violence, but where they lived in their communities, that all of these different things intersected. I mean, it's oppression, right? We know how oppression affects our folks, and that became really clear. But the other thing that became clear to me, or I never really understood, I should say, once it became clear, is why we don't think of sexual violence as a public health issue.
A crisis.
It's a public health crisis, exactly. Yeah.
This question of accountability, and I know that, I know you, and, we are in this work together. We are on a spectrum, basically, of abolitionists, of like wanting to abolish the criminal justice system as it functions right now. And sometimes the day-to-day work of that might look like reform. But there's a real, when it comes to silence, one of the things that's been really getting on my nerves lately is people, and I heard someone just in the store the other day, they're like, well, in these times with all this METOO, I don't know what I could say. I'm like, you cannot be rapey, you cannot sexually harass people.
I feel like it's the same things you should have been doing before.
Right, no, and so people are, so we're getting ready for the blowback. And I wish that Black folks in particular would realize, and Black men, but also Black women, and anyone who's like wondering if it's just too much, if they would realize how much they sound like white folks.
Exactly.
And All Lives Matter folks.
Yeah.
When they were like, I mean, do you have to shut down the freeway? I mean,
Right.
do you have, yes, we're
Right.
disrupting business as usual.
Because we understand, it's because we understand physical death, right? It is permanent. It's the end, but we don't understand that spiritual and in some ways physical death that happens from sexual violence. It just hasn't been elevated in that kind of way. And so, I mean, this is not, the question is about accountability, and
so the question is about accountability beyond the criminal justice system, but finish what you're saying.
No, I say this all the time, although it gets kind of left in the dust, but I feel like since sexual violence happens on a spectrum, we know that, somebody who is catcalling in the street is not the same as somebody who's physically violating your body. And I think we are smart enough to understand that nuance. And so accountability should happen on the spectrum as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing that fits every infraction, if you will. And I think as a community, this is something I also said to you before, that I'm always thinking about what accountability looks like outside of the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system doesn't know how to handle anything well for our community, right? When it comes to our community in particular. And so everything doesn't warrant arrest, everything doesn't even warrant criminal intervention, but it does warrant investigation, it does warrant interrogation. And so part of what I struggle with is that it's, people say you have to believe all women. I actually don't believe that. I don't say that all the time. I think you have to listen to all people. It's not about, right? We're coming at this time right now. This is a moment in history, a moment we've never had in history, where we are having national dialogue about sexual violence. We've been talking about this in secret, and people would never, I think this is so, I love it, and I'm honored to be in these kind of spaces, but I remember begging folks to let me come to their community center or your church or your youth group and say, I just want to do a little presentation, and then fake it, and it'd be like, I want to talk about public health. And then getting there,
Is it public health?
It is a public health issue, but the question of accountability, I think, has to come from community. I think we have to decide what that looks like together, and we have to be courageous about, and particularly I'm gonna speak about the Black community because I think it's mostly Black folks here. Yeah. I think that we have to be courageous in confronting what it looks like in our community so that we can come to solutions, right? We have to be courageous in having these conversations even. We still don't even want to have the conversation. And so once we can have those conversations, then we can start talking about what we need as accountability and what survivors need, right?
And I've been thinking about how that silence affects our health also.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, because another thing that really bothers me about this question of the first thing you have to ask is she like lying? And that is not the first, second, or third question. Actually, what we know by stats is that sexual violence on the spectrum, whether it's harassment or rape, from harassment to rape, is underreported.
Yeah.
like vastly underreported.
Grossly, right, exactly.
Grossly underreported, and then you take those numbers for black women and girls, and it doubles. And it's often because, and this isn't just true of black victims of sexual violence, this is true across, you know, the whole country, and I'll just keep it national, is these are folks in our families. And
Oh, yeah. This whole, you know, and this relates to color of change in some ways, but this whole, we really have to dismantle this narrative that is dangerous, that sexual violence is something that's outside of our communities, or it's just these singular boogeymen, right? I think the way that we've seen this, what they call the MeToo movement in the media, roll out of just, you know, here's another person, here's another person, here's another person, you know, like every week there's some new person that's committed a crime, and then we just focus solely on that person, like this one wrongdoer. If we can just extract the one wrongdoer out of our community, then it'll be okay, and that's not true. It's pervasive, it's in our communities, it's in our churches, it's in our homes, in our schools, it's everywhere. And it's usually, and that's like 90% of the time, people who we know. And that has to be highlighted.
And I will concede that the difference between, where the analogy between white supremacy and kind of racial violence and terror, where that begins to fall apart as an analogy, is that in America we still live largely segregated lives. Mm-hmm. So you can in some ways decide, okay, I'm just not gonna deal with Trump or Trump supporters or like, you know, racist white folks or Daley, you know, like you can make that decision. But when we're not going to do that with like men, right? Or people. It's not, men aren't the only ones who commit sexual violence, but of course it's the majority.
But just to that point too, I think that's a point that I don't want to skip over quickly, because that's something that is, I think, the biggest problem right now, is that we really as a community fail to be able to hold these two truths at the same time. We don't, there is absolute, when you start talking about sexual violence in the black community, particularly if it's a celebrity, it immediately goes to you trying to take down a black man. If it's a male perpetrator, you're trying to take down this black man, he's successful, he was trying to buy NBC, he was doing, you know, whatever. I mean, these are people really believe that stuff, right? So.
They're in the audience, yeah.
He wasn't. But you know, there's these popular narratives around, like, they're just trying to take this man down regardless of the evidence that exists. And that's because it is absolutely true. We have a long, horrific history of black men being disproportionately falsely accused of sexual violence in this country. That is true. We know that. We've seen it from Emmett Till to the Central Park Five. Like, we've seen it over and over again, largely with white women as the supposed victim. While that's true, what's also true is that in every community, and it's not like we have some special depravity in our community, in every community, the perpetrators of sexual violence are largely from in that community.
Any violence.
Any violence, right.
That's why we don't use black on black.
Exactly, because it's just
violence.
crime. It happens in your community.
It's intra-community violence.
And so, but we have to be able to hold both of those truths at the same time, that the numbers, and then add a third component in that, is that we see the statistics about sexual violence on black women. And so there's a statistic that doesn't get used very much. And we've heard that, you know, 1 in 4 girls will experience sexual violence, and 1 in 6 boys by the time they're 18 years old. There's another statistic that says if a black woman is a survivor of sexual violence, experiences sexual violence by 18, she's 66% more likely to experience sexual violence as an adult. That's a devastating statistic, and that's happening at the hands of black men, and we have to just be honest about that. We can be honest about that without throwing every black man under the bus. We can be honest about that without black men having to say, but not me, I'm not that guy, you know? Because what happens is we do that and the conversation's over. Right?
I mean, and that's where the analogy to the other thing is true.
Right.
Not all white folks.
Exactly.
And so then we get into this not all men. And it's like, so it's a way of not talking about the thing itself.
Yeah.
But talking about individual folks that we need to hold accountable, and thank you, Color Change. Color Change is wonderful when it comes to corporate accountability. They will go right past you and target all your sponsors. That's how they got Bill O'Reilly off the air. And right now, thank you to the Color Change team. And right now, Color Change is supporting a campaign that you largely made happen, you know, when you got Time's Up to sign on to this Mute R. Kelly campaign that you started as a hashtag.
Well, and I didn't start the Mute R. Kelly hashtag.
Okay, yeah, you didn't. I'm sorry, it was the
yeah.
sisters from Atlanta.
It was
Will you
the
say their
sisters from-
names? Oh, okay. This is about
Kenyette is
Kenyette.
from Atlanta, and I forgot the Oshadi, I think is from Detroit or Chicago.
They're both in Atlanta.
They're both in
I
Atlanta.
filmed them both for
Yeah.
I'm doing a docuseries about R. Kelly, basically about the women who've survived R. Kelly, and
Yeah.
Tarana is in the docuseries. It'll be out on Lifetime in October. Thank you. So let's talk about R. Kelly real quick. I mean,
Since
and
we're here.
conceding that we have all stepped in the name of love. I mean, it has become it's become, you know, it has not replaced, I don't want to offend nobody, but it has become the new Frankie Beverly.
Don't say it.
Before we let you, I mean, you know, the
Yeah.
wedding song, the Frankie Beverly after the first dance, and when you want everybody to get on the floor, you turn on Frankie Beverly. For a generation, it has been R. Kelly now, Step in the Name of Love. And you know, as someone who used to write about music, I can tell you that the Chocolate Factory, which is what Step in the Name of Love is on an album called The Chocolate Factory, and that album was released after the videotape came out where we all witnessed R. Kelly committing, there are children in the room, so I'm not going to describe the video, but committing violence against a 14-year-old girl, sexual violence. And what he did is he then came out with the best album of his career.
Yep. And we forgot about it, just like that.
But you didn't let us forget about it, you and other folks, because you definitely were an amplifier of the Mute R. Kelly hashtag. So let's talk about, and again, Color Change is running a campaign to get RCA to drop him in this moment.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you, Color Change. So, and I can tell you, having worked on this project and thought about this man for 12 years, that this is beyond.
Oh,
I mean, he is to the left of Harvey Weinstein. Y'all have
Yeah.
no idea. The stuff that I'm not going to be able to put on the TV is
Crazy.
insane.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about that campaign and what it means when we do target someone individually?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, you know, I've been quoted saying these two things, and then people try to say, well, you said this, because I'll say, you know, we need to stop just naming these individual men. It's like playing whack-a-mole, right, after a while, and just say, it's another one, and another one. It's a system. These are systems that are in place that about those men. But also, sometimes you have to target a person like R. Kelly, it's two things. One, he is depraved. He's depraved, and like there's things that both of us know about him that hasn't been publicly released, but even the things that we do know that have been publicly released, like this video, he's depraved. So there's that. He also is representative of other depraved individuals who are in our community, who we've normalized. And so for me, it's about not normalizing that behavior. And so hopefully that if we don't normalize behavior like R. Kelly's behavior, that we won't normalize the coach's behavior, or we won't normalize Mr. So-and-so's behavior, right? Like, we have to recognize these individuals who are right around us, who smile at us and who we love so much, who are taking advantage of our children right now. So that's why I like to keep talking about it.
And the third thing that becomes complicated about R. Kelly, and this is public, he wrote it in his book with David Ritz, is that he himself is a victim. Sexual violence. He was a child. At 7 years old, he began being abused in his own home for 7 years. And to remind you, a 7-year-old is a second grader. And then he was abused by a man down the street from him at 12. So these are things that he has written about and talked about publicly. And so we get into this question of a cycle of abuse. But I think that with R. Kelly, the other thing that I wanted to say that was important about what you did, because we have enablers and this question about corporate accountability, that the path and the target that Color Change is taking with RCA and that Time's Up and Mute R. Kelly is taking with RCA and singling them out is important. But then there are these other community enablers, you know? And you had a conversation with Tom Joyner.
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the conversation that you had with Tom Joyner that ended up in Tom Joyner committing on his way out, it kind of feels like those Republicans who are like, yeah, Trump is the worst, on their way out or whatever.
Yeah,
so Tom Joyner's about to retire, and on his way out, he's saying that he's no longer going to play R. Kelly.
Yeah.
Which, in my estimation, is almost 18 years too late because the tape came out in 2001.
Well, also
But
he had him on his boat 2 years ago, right? And
but
so
how did that conversation go?
the conversation was it was a whole bunch of drama before it, right? And there was a woman who was on his show. I don't even remember her name now. It was a woman who was on his show who was calling me out, saying, you know, that's nice to be on the cover of magazines and stuff, but what about black women and girls? And I was like, me? That's all I talk about is black women and girls. And so through the course of a conversation with her and Jackie Reed, who was on the show, Jackie asked me to come on the show. Now, the important thing for me in that moment was, you know, clearly I have a level of visibility I've never had in my life. Now, it makes no sense for me to have this visibility if I can't have moments like that with Tom Joyner. It makes no sense, right? To, like, you know, the world doesn't need to know me if I'm not in a position to do something. And so it bothered me so much about Tom Joyner having this man on his cruise in 2015. Right, like, or 2016, like very recently, and even he was going to have Chris Brown this year on his cruise, and then something happened. I don't think he pulled him. I think something happened. But anyway, in the course of the conversation, Tom Joyner said, "Well, what can we do?" Which actually was really funny to me. I just thought, it's a lot you can do, right? And he said, you know, what can we do? As if I'm really committed to this cause, sister. I want to help out. And I was like, well, you could stop playing his music. You can stop normalizing his music on the music is good, and not all of it, but the music is good. We like it. We've grown. A lot of people grew up to it. You've been hearing it for years. It's hard not to bop your head to it or whatever. I get it. All right, there's lots of, I get that. It's not that, you know, people are saying, well, it's easy for you because you don't like R. Kelly. No, I was very much Your Body's Calling Me and all the rest of that. Those are my college years, right? So I get that it's hard, but at some point, when are we going to make sacrifices for our children, for our people, for our community? Like, yeah. Oh, yeah, there has to be a moment that we make a decision. Sexual violence is not going to change in our communities until we make a decision. And that decision has to be, it could be different for different people, but you have to have a line. I'm even grappling with now, because we've talked about R. Kelly so much, that this is not quite true yet, but I don't want him, it's almost like he's the low-hanging fruit now almost, right? Like, we can focus on R. Kelly. We haven't focused on the fact that Russell Simmons has 18 public allegations of rape against him right in this moment. There are 18, look it up. There have been 18 public allegations, and he describes the way in which he chased women or whatever in his own book back in 2000 and something. And these stories are all consistent, all similar details of that. But nobody is, you know what I mean? R. Kelly, we've been talking about R. Kelly for 20 years. Of course you know that man is a pedophile and a crazy, deranged, sexual violence, whatever. But he's not the only one. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to figure out what our lines are.
I was trying to find this thing that I wrote called An Anatomy of an Apology, because what comes after, you know, this question of, like, this punishment. And the reason we have to do things like censor folks and, quite frankly, isolate them is because sometimes that's the only time that you have your reckoning. Yeah. You know, if there's no motivation, and often it's about money and capitalism, quite frankly. If there's no money, if there's no motivation, if there's not, and this is true around all kinds of power, right? Then there is no real accountability. Yeah. And it doesn't mean, and there's a question and a conversation right now that I'm glad we're having around cancel culture and about not throwing folks away. Exactly. That I'm very interested in, having been thrown away. Like, I've had all that happen online and all the things. But there's also this question of, like, publicly owning your thing. Yeah. You know, R. Kelly in particular, Russell came back with a "not me" hashtag, which was just offensive, instead of, like, taking all his mindfulness and his meditation, right, and his, you know, and sitting somewhere in a corner and dealing with what he has admitted to, you know? And, you know, R. Kelly came out with a 19-minute song a couple days or weeks ago with these, like, you know, the fake apology, which is, I'm sorry if you felt offended. That's not an apology.
It's not.
An apology acknowledges how you have harmed someone. It makes a promise to never do it again.
Yeah.
Here's my understanding of how I hurt you. So I can't get online in here, but I wrote this thing that went viral a long time ago. It's 5 pieces. It's called An Anatomy of an Apology. I want to open up the, and I know you guys are going to have questions for Tarana, and we only have 15 minutes left. So I don't know if we're bringing the lights up in the house, and I know Tarana wanted this, you know, opportunity to talk to folks. So maybe whoever is in the back could maybe bring up some lights on the house? Yeah. And we could, if anyone has questions for Tarana, oh, hey, y'all.
Oh, yeah, there's people here. Look at that.
I know. If anyone has questions for Tarana Burke.
Some hands back there.
Yes. Oh, our winner from today, from Flint,
Yes,
Michigan.
Flint, Michigan. Congratulations again.
Here, I'll give you mine. No, I don't need one. Thank you.
It was just on.
Yeah,
There you go.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask a question about, let me go away from here.
Where you
I'm
going?
sorry, I don't know, I didn't want to block people. I'm thinking about,
Can somebody raise their hand?
I'm thinking about how I grew up in Flint. I'm thinking about the things my mother taught me, and I'm thinking about the situations I've been in and the situations I've been able to avoid being in, especially in entertainment. And I'm so grateful to my mother because she taught me not to worship people, like for real. So when I have been in situations or men have felt like they could get me to do something or whatever, it's like, are you crazy? You know, that, like, my gut reaction is like, I don't give a who you are, right? And it's been that way. So my question is, what kind of work can we do to empower young women so that regardless of the men and what their intentions are, that we can just build up our self-esteem and our confidence so we can be better equipped to handle these kind of things when they come our way?
Let me tell you, this comes up all the time, and this is, sister, I just want you to know I appreciate you and I appreciate what you're saying. I feel a little bit differently, though. The question always comes up of what we can do for our girls. What can we do to give, self-esteem is not going to protect you from being raped. It's not. It's not going to protect you from being sexually harassed either. We have a community problem. We have, there's an absence of morality. We have a moral deficit, I think, happening, that we have to educate both our young men, our young boys, however you identify on a gender spectrum. We have to be re-educated, really, about roles and responsibilities, about consent, about all of these different things that is not going to be mitigated by having a healthier self-esteem. It's going to be mitigated by understanding our humanity, to have a better connection to each other as human beings so that we don't violate each other in those ways. I do think, you know, we need to, our girls, our young people need to be empowered to speak up, to say, you know, to stand up for themselves and those kind of things. So do our boys, so do, you know, however you identify. That's a very important aspect of just growing and maturing in this world, to be armored for the world. But it can get dangerous to me as it relates to sexual violence, because it makes it seem like if I can just give you enough this, then you might be protected from that, and it's just not true.
And we always have to look at the structural and the, like, over, you know, I mean, there's data, but then there is the larger picture, which is why we do so much of this work, you know. Yes, some of it is individual one-on-one and being better humans, but then there are, like, holding
Systems
of power, and, well, first of all, breaking systems of power down, but holding folks accountable. And today is Black Women's Equal Pay Day.
Oh, yeah, that's
right.
Yeah.
And to Tarana's point, Black women aren't getting paid less on the dollar because we have lower self-esteem.
Right.
We're not getting paid less on the dollar because our mother didn't teach us, how to, and this is no offense, I understand what you were saying. Yeah. But I'm saying this is how we scale up these questions, right? We're not getting paid less on the dollar, and this of course is true of all women, but Black women and then Latino women are underneath us, right? We're not getting paid less. Even this question of, what you'll hear back from men, particularly in the HR offices or corporate men. I belong to lots of different communities, and I'll hear these Silicon Valley people. They have a whole panel on negotiating. You know what I'm saying? And I've been a good negotiator my entire life. I have pushed for every salary that I've ever gotten, only still to find out later that the men I was working with were making triple. Now, I done double what you offered me, which is a really bold negotiation move. And then I find out that the men were making triple, and this is writing award shows for Black, networks and all kinds of things. Writing award shows for Black networks about Black girls, So it gets deep. Anyone else have a question?
Oh, it's quite a few.
Hello.
Is there somebody picking? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Hey, Virgo sisters, I'm with you. Okay. I do think it's an important addition to a bio. So thank you for the work that you do. It's much appreciated. I have a question as a mother of two boys. So we hear two teenage boys, and we hear a lot of the conversation centered around how we're going to educate the girls. But we also need to have a separate conversation on how the boys and girls have to interact together. Because some of the stories my boys tell me, just as being in high school and in 8th grade, about how girls are treating boys needs to be addressed so that the boys are equipped with the right kind of education and information to counteract those kind of issues when girls come up and slap them, push them, trip them.
I mean, that's what I meant by, that's what I was saying to the sister. It can't just be isolated. That we need an unlearning to happen around this. And I think that there's also this false idea that, in some instances that if, that's how girls can protect themselves, right? You gotta be bolder than the boys. You gotta get them before you get you, or show them that they can't beat you and all of those kind of things. There's a lot of, which is for protection in a lot of instances in their mind. But I agree. I just think that we have to have, it has to be a deep unlearning, and it has to be, I really am a proponent of comprehensive sex education in our schools, which would include, they would start early. I always say if you can teach a kindergarten kid not to run with scissors, you can teach them what consent is. You can teach them to ask questions beforehand, or not to put your hands on so-and-so or whatever. So yeah, I really think we have to start young.
And while, as a writer and a filmmaker, I really value anecdotal evidence and individual stories, but at the same time, there's data, right? And we know, again, American Heart Association is sponsoring this conversation, and we know that heart failure and heart sickness and is one of the #1 reasons that Black women are dying. Up there in the top 5 is domestic violence and intimate violence, particularly with young girls. So we have this anecdotal evidence, and I'm not saying that what happens to you as a mother with your sons coming home, talking about this aggression coming from girls, isn't happening. Of course it is. But what we know also, and to be far more not compelling, but overwhelming in terms of harm in our community. In fact, we have numbers that show that more women of color are dying in their homes at the hands of domestic abuse than Black men are dying by police violence. But obviously, we have a focus in our community on one and a dead silence around the other. The year that Mike Brown was killed, the year Mike Brown was killed, we had 1,138 extrajudicial killings in this country. They weren't all Black. Native Americans, percentage-wise, are the most affected by police violence. But trust me, we had way more women dying domestic violence that year. So another question.
Hi, my name is Afra. I have a question for you. As a survivor and also as someone that works for a racial justice organization that is focused on abolition, we focus on areas of voting rights and disenfranchisement and things like that, policing, to do reform in that way. But on the side of women's rights and on the side of us talking about sexual violence, how do we reconcile sexual violence and MeToo movement while with abolition? That's something that I think I personally am still trying to wrap my head around as we try to completely change the way that we live and are in the world. How do we do that?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for that question. Can we get, so we only have 3 more minutes left. Can we get the next 2 questions? And then we'll
And then
get
we
to
can-
Rhonda.
We'll answer them
Our
all.
folks, yeah, just get, and I'm sorry, we only had, yeah. So let's get 2 more so that Tarana can have all 3 stacked. The first question was one that I asked earlier about accountability outside of the criminal justice system, but definitely address that again. And then the next 2 questions.
Hi, my name is Natalie Archibald, and I work in media. So, well, first,
Did you say I'm 12?
No, she works in media.
I work
I'm
in
sorry.
media. I'm a tall 12-year-old. No, first I want to say BX representing in Martha's Vineyard. So yes. But I'm a little bothered by Rose McGowan always being called like the face of the Me Too movement. And I know we talked about the question of Alyssa Milano. You said you appreciate the amplification, but how do you feel about having other people be named the face of a movement that you created?
Okay.
And the third question?
My question is, my name is Helen, and I just want to say that, yes, we have many, many issues in our community, and I am a woman, and I certainly do not advocate that women or anybody else is raped. My concern is when we embrace a double standard for ourselves that we don't embrace, that we don't hold other communities accountable for. And we can talk about, you know, we got to protect ourselves. But when we talk about allowing that our men, or first of all, let's stop saying that the victim is always a woman, and let's just say victim.
I never said that.
Oh, no, I didn't say you. But I'm saying that this whole conversation, to me, I'm so glad that we're having it, but we really need to talk in terms of being less gender, because there are women who do the same things that men do. We don't talk about that. And when black men in our community do things, we need to hold them to the same standard that we hold men in other communities to. And I think we get so caught up on that we have to be careful to not dilute the real issue. And the issue is people being violated. And when we have, like what happened to Al Franken, to me, was unexcusable. And this is a man who did apologize and said, I didn't realize, and he still got desecrated.
I want to just get to the question part.
Anyway, the question is, you know, when we need to open up the conversation so that everybody has a voice, and so that people, the only way we're going to get to a solution is to allow people who have a different opinion to have a voice so that you can talk about it. So how do we do that? So that everybody has a voice. I feel like I don't have a voice sometimes.
Okay.
And
So
I'm
the
not
first-
a victim blamer or a victim shamer. I just think, as the lady said up front, that we need to teach ourselves. And when you say teach
We're
young
wrapping
ladies,
at
well,
3:30. I'm sorry, we're wrapping at 3:30.
I don't want to cut you off, but I got your question. How do we
Okay.
do that?
And I'm gonna leave the stage for the question, only because I have a hard 3:30 out. But it was a question about accountability outside the criminal justice system, about being the face of a movement, and I'm not sure what the third question was, but I'm sure you got it.
I love you, Dream.
Okay, bye.
So sister, the first question that you asked about accountability, in all honesty, I feel that very deeply. And Dream and I actually were talking about this, and I talk about it all the time, that as a survivor, as a person who I believe in restorative justice, I believe in transformative justice, but I definitely struggle around what that looks like when it comes to sexual violence. And I know and I'm sure I've met, you know, parents of whose children have been murdered, who struggle around death penalty and things like that. And I think when it's very personal to you, that part of you, it's hard to to try to, make that extra leap. And so I'm in constant conversation and in community with people who do that work to try to get a better understanding of what that could look like. And I think that's why I was saying that we have to open up the dialogue in our community so we can start defining what accountability looks like outside of the criminal justice system, or if it is inside the criminal justice system, what does that mean, right? If it is that this person is going to jail, what happens? Do they come back out the same person, right? That's what happens most times. So I don't have an answer for what it looks like. I just know that I'm publicly grappling with it and always looking for bigger and broader ideas, because I know that, for instance, in the case of like R. Kelly, we were just talking about, that comes up often, that he was also a survivor of sexual violence as a child. Obviously, every survivor of sexual violence doesn't become a predator, right? That we know that's not true. But we know that it has some implications and something that should be taken into account when we think about accountability for him. Or Chris Brown, even when he, had this tumultuous childhood, and then we heard about that after the situation with Rihanna and Karuchi, whatever. Those are things we have to take into account. I don't believe in throwing people away in our community, but I do believe that isolation is necessary sometimes. You have to be outside of the community in order to get what you need before you're allowed to come back in. So I'm still grappling with that myself. So I understand. And the other sister over here. So this is what I say, and I don't know if any of y'all were at Essence Fest. Anybody here was at Essence Fest? Okay, so you might have heard me say this already. I don't care about white folks. And I mean that, not y'all. And I don't mean that, I'm being a little bit flippant, but this is the problem. When people say so-and-so is the face of the MeToo movement, or when they say things like the MeToo movement has taken down so-and-so and another person is a victim of, those things are actually not the MeToo movement. And this is why I'm less bothered by it. I'm less bothered by it because, one, I have a body of work that exists that extends back 20 years that's led me to be ready for this moment, right? And what they're really talking about is the media. All of these things, when they say the Me Too movement has taken down something else, it's really the media has taken down somebody else. The media has identified this person and said, da-da-da, put them on the front page and blah, blah, blah. Or Rose McGowan gets on some show and she's talking about, I am the movement, da-da-da. That's not movement. We know what a movement is. That's not a movement. A movement is built on people and on work. And I am with the people and I'm doing my work. And so that's not, and honestly, as long as the people who I'm accountable, y'all, are saying, well done, are saying, thank you, are saying this is working, that's what matters to me. So you may see me on less and less TV shows and less, or you may see me on more. None of that really matters in the grand scheme of things. This moment for me has been about, I never thought it would happen, obviously. I never thought there would be a moment where I'd be recognized in the street and all of that kind of stuff. And as many challenges come with it, the part of it that is a blessing is the fact that I'm able to take this visibility and use it to have these conversations, extend this work, represent folks that look like me, little girls who look like me, talk about what's happening in our communities, and use that as an example of what's happening in other communities so that people understand that when I center Black and brown girls, it's not to the detriment or to the exclusion of anybody else, right? It means that when you make sure that the person who has the least in the room gets what they need, that everybody gets what they need. So I'm fine with that. And I'll close, sis, I think, I don't know where you went, but I think what you were saying is that there are more than one, there's more than one opinion about this work and about this movement. And I appreciate that. There are some things that sometimes we do have highly gendered conversations. I agree with that. We have highly gendered conversations because women disproportionately represent the face of sexual violence. And that's not, I actually think that men and boys get left out of the conversation for really unfortunate, Oh, I thought somebody was talking to me. Sorry. I thought they get left out because there's another layer of shame, even more so than us, around whether they're homosexual or all of these different things that men have to grapple with around that deal when their masculinity is questioning that. So that keeps them from talking about it. And women are more encouraged to come forward and talk about it. And so the conversation does get skewed. But the numbers are what the numbers are. And women are largely the survivors of sexual violence. So that's why I think it gets gendered. We don't talk about trans folks. We don't talk about queer people. We don't talk about lots of people on the gender spectrum who are also, transgender women are largely survivors of sexual violence, just like they're largely murdered. You know, like there's lots of conversations we're not having. And I'm fine with folks saying, Tarana, you didn't say this, right? I'm okay. I like to be held accountable because, again, I work for y'all, right? There's no reason to know me if I'm not doing the work for y'all. So if you think I'm not saying something or not representing something, I'm fine with people being like, hey, don't forget about this group. Don't forget about that group. Or here's information you may not know. But I think that I try to make space for the broadest conversation possible because everybody hopefully will leave here with something that they didn't know and will be charged to do something about it. And I think the more information you have, the more ammunition that is for you to do something about it. And if I could leave you with anything before I take my leave from the stage, is that everybody here has a role. Every one of you, if it's sexual harassment in the workplace, which is not really my lane, but obviously it's a huge issue, maybe it's you get 5 of your girlfriends and you look at the sexual harassment policy at your job, because most folks don't read it. You really, get 5 of your girlfriends, get some coffee, and y'all look at the sexual harassment policy and compare that to your lived experience at your job. Does this cover, would you be covered in that? Maybe if you're a parent, you talk to some other parents about what's happening with your children. How many people does your child interact with from the time they leave your house to the time they come back? And who's vetting those people, right? There are lots of ways that you can, I'm gonna tell you what, I'm getting up because I'm doing like the black preachers do. I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna go. But, right? But all the Me Too movement was me looking around in my community, thinking about my lived experience and seeing the gaps that were existing. And knowing that I'm looking at these little girls who I was working with every day, and I'm seeing this pain in their face that was very familiar to me. And knowing that, wanting to do anything I could to mitigate that pain, anything I could to ensure that they may feel a day less pain than I did. That was a gap. Nobody was speaking healing into our community. Nobody was speaking survival into our community or possibility into our community from walking away from sexual violence. And so it was a gap that I tried to fill. And I try to fill that gap every single day. If you want to do this work, you don't have to call it a movement. You don't need a hashtag. Just look for the gaps in your community and do what you can to fill them.
And on that note, let's give it up for Ms. Tarana Burke.